The microphone feedback shrieked through the crystal atrium, silencing 300 of Chicago's culinary elite. The harsh frequency sliced through the ambient jazz, freezing waiters mid-step and choking off the laughter at the VIP tables. Nia's hands dropped to the hard swell of her 29-month belly. The cream silk of her maternity gown slipped beneath her damp palms. A sharp, erratic kick from Maya fluttered against her lower ribs. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her sternum. The rich scent of black truffle, pan-seared duck, and burnt sugar soured in the back of her throat. Heavy silver cutlery clattered against fine bone china as the guests abandoned their meals. The low hum of industry gossip evaporated into the vaulted glass ceilings. Julian stood at the mahogany podium. His dark, bespoke tailored suit drank the light of the 100-foot crystal chandelier hanging above him. The midnight charcoal fabric draped his broad shoulders. He gripped the edges of the lectern. His knuckles strained against his rich brown skin. The audience waited. The string quartet in the mezzanine balcony had stopped mid-measure. The silence in the room felt heavy, suffocating, pressing into the pores of every Michelin-starred chef, renowned food critic, and wealthy socialite seated at the diamond-draped tables. Nia lifted her chin. She expected the dedication. They had spent 40 consecutive nights in the sweltering heat of the Sterling Patisserie kitchen, perfecting the heritage honey cake. Her knuckles still bore the faint, shiny burn scars from pulling the boiling caramel lattice out of the industrial oven. She smiled, waiting for her husband to call her name. She had dreamed of this exact moment since they signed the lease on their first tiny storefront on the South Side. Excellence demands integrity. Julian leaned into the silver microphone. His baritone voice bounced off the glass walls, amplified by the cavernous acoustics of the atrium. And tonight, as I accept the Vanguard Award for Culinary Innovation, I must address the rot that nearly destroyed my kitchen, the ultimate betrayal that threatened to burn my budding empire to the ground. Nia's smile faltered. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. A woman in a blood-red halter dress stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing. Chloe Vance! Her heavy, layered gold bangles clanked against the metal microphone stand as she slapped a thick manila folder onto the podium. The red silk hugged her hips, the side slit climbing high on her brown thigh. She tossed her long, dark, silk-pressed hair over one shoulder. A diamond-crusted pendant rested in the hollow of her collarbone, catching the rapid-fire flashes of the press cameras. She leaned against Julian's side. He did not flinch away. He leaned into her. Sterling Patisserie was built on trust. Julian tapped the manila folder. The sharp thud echoed over the massive speakers. We built an empire on original recipes. Generational brilliance. The kind of brilliance you cannot fake, no matter how many hours you spend watching a master work. But a month ago, my PR director, Miss Vance, uncovered a plot of corporate espionage happening right under my nose, happening in my own bed. The collective gasp of 300 people sucked the oxygen from the atrium. Waiters froze with crystal champagne bottles suspended in mid-air. An older critic at table 4 dropped his pen. Nia froze. The breath trapped in her lungs. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her cream silk dress, tracing the curve of Maya's resting place. The baby rolled, sensing the sudden spike of adrenaline flooding Nia's veins. A cameraman positioned in the center aisle shifted his weight. Liam Chen, his heavy matte black videography rig rested on his right shoulder, the red recording light blinking a steady rhythmic pulse. His dark locks were tied back in a neat leather band. He panned the thick glass lens away from Julian's face. He zoomed in on Nia. He framed the shock contorting her features, the stark contrast of her cream dress against her warm brown skin. He did not blink. He said nothing. He only turned the ribbed focus ring, ensuring every ounce of her devastation was recorded in ultra-high definition. Julian thrust a commanding finger toward table 1. My wife, my former head baker, Nia Sterling. Every head snapped toward her. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, erratic strobe. She thought she could reverse engineer my signature honey cake. Julian's voice grew louder, filling every corner of the vast glass-domed room. She thought she could observe my techniques, take the proprietary ratios that I spent 2 grueling years developing, and claim them as her own. She thought she could slip out in the dead of night, hawk my genius to our competitors, and fund a comfortable little exit strategy using my renowned name. Nia stood up. The heavy oak chair scraped against the marble floor. Her chin rose higher. Her jaw locked. She stared at the man she had married. The man who had begged her to write down the recipe she knew by heart, the recipe her grandmother had whispered to her on Sunday mornings in a cramped kitchen 20 years ago. The recipe he now claimed was his own invention. Julian scoffed into the mic. Look at her, playing the victim, using her delicate condition to shield herself from the consequences of her own boundless greed. It makes me sick. It makes a mockery of everything this historic institute stands for. I will not allow a thief to ride my coattails to the top of the culinary world. Chloe laughed. The sound was sharp, metallic, carrying through the microphone like a serrated blade. She tapped her long acrylic nails against the folder, producing a sharp drumming noise. We have the trademark filings. Chloe's voice dripped with practiced theatrical sympathy. The gold bangles rattled again. Julian filed for the heritage patent over a year ago. Nia's backdoor emails to rival bakeries trying to sell his work are all printed right here. Hundreds of pages of premeditated betrayal. It is a tragedy, really, what raw jealousy does to a woman's mind. What insignificance drives a lowly line cook to do? Nia's mouth opened. The denial lodged in her dry throat. Her silence stretched, thick and devastating, commanding the room more than any scream could. She pressed her hand flat against her belly, shielding the sudden, frantic tumbling of the baby inside her. She refused to give them a reaction. She refused to break. Julian marched down the 3 carpeted steps from the stage. The crowd parted like water. Waiters pressed themselves against the silk-draped walls. Industry titans lowered their crystal champagne flutes. The flashbulbs intensified, a staccato assault of white light bouncing off the diamond necklaces of the wealthy women seated at the front tables. He stopped inches from her face. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, turned her stomach. It was the custom bottle she bought him for their first anniversary. Julian, you know the truth. Her voice lacked volume but carried a razor-sharp edge. She did not plead. She did not break eye contact. The truth is right here, Nia. He snatched a printed sheet from his jacket pocket and threw it onto the table. It scattered over a plate of untouched beluga caviar. The truth is, you are a line cook. You were always just a line cook. I elevated you. I put a ring on your finger. I gave you access to premium ingredients. I let you share a kitchen with a mastermind. And you repay me by acting like a common street thief. That recipe is mine. Nothing is yours. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. His dark eyes held zero warmth, only a hollow, ravenous ambition. You own nothing. You built nothing. You are a footnote in the history of sterling patisserie. I am the face. I am the creator. I am the undisputed king of Chicago's culinary scene. You're just a pregnant thief crying over burnt sugar. I pity you. Liam Chen circled them. The red recording light blinked. He knelt on the cold marble, capturing the low, dramatic angle. He filmed the aggressive posture of Julian's broad shoulders looming over Nia's delicate, cream-clad frame. Liam's finger adjusted the audio gain, capturing the wet, uneven breaths slipping from Nia's nose. He captured the thick vein throbbing in Julian's temple. Chloe sauntered down the steps. The heavy red silk of her dress swished against the floor. She stepped up beside Julian and linked her bare arm through his. The heavy gold bracelet scraped against his dark sleeve. She looked at Nia's swollen belly, then up to Nia's eyes. A slow, poisonous smirk stretched across her glossy lips. Security is waiting in the lobby, Nia. Chloe tilted her head. Don't make this uglier than it already is. Think of your health. Think of the baby. We wouldn't want the stress to cause any early complications. Nia did not look at Chloe. She kept her gaze locked on Julian. You will regret this. Julian threw his head back and laughed, a booming, hollow sound that echoed off the vast glass ceiling. Regret excising a parasite from my kitchen? I think not. Julian signaled the massive oak double doors with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Remove her. 2 private security guards in navy uniforms stepped out from the crowd. They flanked Nia. The taller one reached for her elbow. Nia flinched. She stepped backward. Her heel caught the heavy velvet hem of the tablecloth. She lost her balance. The world tilted. Her hands flew forward, missing the table edge. She twisted her body mid-air to protect her stomach. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of the adjoining table. A towering pyramid of crystal champagne flutes shattered. The glass rained down around her in a glittering, deadly shower. She hit the marble floor. Pain shot up her spine, radiating outward in sharp electric spikes. She curled into herself, both hands pressed flat, desperate and urgent. Against her stomach, Maya rolled in distress. A sharp, localized cramp tightened across Nia's lower abdomen, stealing the air from her lungs. The room erupted. Cameras clicked in a frenzy. The chaotic sound of breaking glass continued to ring in the atrium. Julian stood over her. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks. He looked down at his wife, writhing in a halo of shattered crystal and spilled champagne. He did not reach out. He did not bend down. Pathetic. He turned his back. Chloe stepped over a broken flute, her red stiletto grinding the thin glass into fine powder. She wrapped her hands around Julian's waist. They walked back toward the stage. The crowd applauded. The terrifying, thunderous sound of 300 people clapping for the destruction of a pregnant woman's life. Liam Chen stayed close. His camera hovered inches from Nia's face, recording the exact moment a solitary tear broke free and tracked through the spilled champagne on her cheek. He documented the cold, indifferent backs of Julian and Chloe retreating to the podium. He recorded it all. Nia lay on the freezing marble, fighting to draw air into her lungs, willing her baby to stay still, willing the cramping to stop. Blood stained the cream silk. An ambulance sped away. Sirens wailed into the night. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Northwestern Memorial Prestige Maternity Wing buzzed. a trapped hornet inside her skull. She lay on her side, the thin, crinkling sanitary paper covering the examination bed stuck to the damp skin of her cheek. The sterile room smelled of bleached cotton and floor wax. It tasted like iodine, copper, and raw fear. Her hands shook. The tremors started in her tight shoulders and rolled down her bare arms, vibrating through her wrists until her fingertips rattled against the metal bedrail. She could not stop them. The air conditioning blew across her bare legs. The cream silk of her maternity gown hung in ruined, heavy folds around her knees. The fabric was stiff with drying blood and spilled champagne. The crimson stains spread across the delicate white silk like a blooming rose, a glaring testament to the public slaughter she had just survived. She pressed both hands flat against the hard swell of her stomach. She held her breath. She waited for a kick. She lay on the cold vinyl mattress for a long moment, both hands pressing into the silk, listening for any sign that Maya had survived what she could not stop. There was nothing. A sharp, seizing cramp coiled across her lower back. She bit the inside of her cheek. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth. The pain radiated through her pelvis, hot and jagged, stealing the oxygen from the small room. She curled her knees upward, her chin tucked against her collarbone. She closed her eyes. She would not scream. The ringing in her ears drowned out the faint, rhythmic beeping of the fetal monitor strapped across her belly. It sounded exactly like the shrieking microphone feedback from the crystal atrium, playing on a punishing loop. Every time she blinked, the after image of 100 camera flashbulbs exploded behind her eyelids. The white light gave way to the memory of Julian's face, his dark, bespoke tailored suit, his broad shoulders looming over her, the platinum cufflinks catching the light as he looked down at her bleeding on the marble floor. He had not reached out. He had not bent down. He had called her pathetic. The door handle clicked. Nia tensed. Her fingers dug into the sides of her stomach. She expected the heavy footsteps of hospital administrators bringing billing clipboards, or the shuffle of a pitying nurse ready to ask questions she could not answer. The heavy oak door pushed open. A man stepped into the stark white room. He did not wear a lab coat. He wore a black tactical vest over a charcoal turtleneck. His dark locks were pulled back into a neat leather band. Liam Chen, the videographer from the atrium. The massive matte black camera rig was gone, replaced by a sleek, silver camera slung across his chest. Mia pushed herself up on one elbow. The room spun. The edges of her vision blurred into a gray, watery haze. She blinked hard, forcing the shape of him into focus. She braced herself. She waited for him to raise the lens. She waited for another flash, another angle of the ruined baker to feed the Chicago culinary gossip blogs by midnight. Liam did not touch his camera. He walked to the stainless steel sink in the corner of the room. He turned the chrome handle. The water ran cold and clear over a stack of white hospital washcloths. He wrung out the fabric. The movements were heavy, deliberate. The water splashed against the metal basin. He walked back to her bed. He stopped at the edge of the mattress. He did not speak. His dark eyes held no pity, only a quiet, steady acknowledgement of the wreckage. He extended his hand. Nia stared at the damp white cloth resting in his palm. The fabric steamed in the frigid air of the triage bay. She reached out. Her trembling fingers brushed his warm skin. She took the cloth. She pressed the wet cotton to her cheek. The freezing water shocked her skin, cutting through the dizzying fog in her head. She wiped the dried champagne and mascara from her face. She wiped the cold sweat from her neck. The rough texture of the towel grounded her. Liam reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out a thick, black cardstock rectangle. He set it on the rolling metal tray table beside her bed. He placed a small plastic cup of ice water next to it. He took one step back. He tapped his chest, right over his heart, twice. He turned around. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him. Nia looked at the black card. No name, no logo, just a 10-digit phone number stamped in gold foil and a tiny silver emblem of a camera aperture in the bottom corner. She picked up the plastic cup. The ice clinked against the thin plastic sides. She drank the water in 3 long, desperate swallows. The freezing liquid washed away the taste of copper and bile. She swung her legs over the edge of the examination bed. The sanitary paper crinkled under her weight. The sharp cramp in her abdomen receded, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache in her muscles. She placed her left hand on her swollen belly. Maya shifted. A distinct rolling kick pushed outward against Nia's palm. Air rushed into Nia's lungs. She dropped her head forward. The tears she had been fighting crested over her dark lashes. They fell hot and fast, tracking through the damp streaks on her cheeks, dropping onto the ruined bodice of her cream silk dress. She wept for the danger she had put her daughter in. She wept for the sheer, terrifying vulnerability of loving a man who viewed her as a stepping stone. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stared at her reflection in the dark, unlit screen of the television mounted on the opposite wall. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her dress was a canvas of her own blood and her husband's victory. This was the last time. She pressed her fingers into her stomach, feeling the warmth of the life she was carrying. She would never shed another tear where a lens could catch it. She would never let another crowd applaud her destruction. The Heritage Honey Cake. Julian's voice echoed in her mind. He claimed the recipe took him 2 grueling years to develop. He claimed it was his signature masterpiece. Her hands tightened into fists. Her blunt fingernails dug into her palms. She remembered the heavy scent of burnt sugar and scraped vanilla beans in her grandmother's cramped kitchen on the south side. She remembered the cracked yellow linoleum floor. She remembered standing on a plastic step stool, watching her grandmother whisk the heavy cream until it peaked like fresh snow. That cake belonged to a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on. It belonged to the Holloway family. Julian knew this. He knew every late night she had spent in his sweltering commercial kitchen, weeping over the industrial mixing bowls, trying to recreate the exact texture of her childhood. He had stood behind her. He had massaged her shoulders. He had whispered in her ear, coaxing the exact measurements out of her memory, writing them down in his leather-bound notebook while she kneaded the sweet dough. He had stolen her legacy. He had branded it with his name. And then he had thrown her out, laughing with his mistress while the flashbulbs documented the slaughter. Chloe Vance. The heavy clanking of her gold bangles rang in Nia's ears. The red silk dress, the venomous rehearsed smirk. Chloe had held the forged trademark papers like a loaded gun. They had planned the entire spectacle. They had backdated the filings. They had orchestrated the public execution at the Culinary Excellence Gala to ensure Nia could never work in another kitchen in the city. They wanted to strip her of her credibility before she could ever claim what was rightfully hers. They thought she was just a line cook. They thought she was a naive, ambitious girl who got lucky when the great Julian Sterling noticed her at a local pastry competition. Nia's jaw locked, the muscles in her neck pulled tight. She had hidden her last name to protect him. She had hidden the Holloway empire because Julian's pride was fragile. When they met, he was drowning in debt, struggling to keep his first bakery open. She had wanted to build something with him, from the ground up, based on their shared passion for the craft. She had refused her father's massive network. She had refused the security detail, the trust fund, the influence of a billionaire chairman who could have bought the Chicago Culinary Institute with a single phone call. She had made herself small so Julian could feel big. Her humility had nearly cost her baby's life. She touched the gold foil numbers on the black card Liam had left. The videographer had recorded everything: the audio, the cruel laughter, the exact moment Julian stepped over her shattered body. Liam held the unedited truth. Julian and Chloe held a fabricated narrative. But they did not know who they had just declared war on. The door handle turned again. A young nurse walked in holding a digital tablet. Her scrubs were a soft periwinkle blue. She looked at the blood on Nia's dress and hesitated. Her eyes flicked down to the floor, avoiding direct eye contact. "Mrs. Sterling?" Nia did not answer. The name tasted like ash. It did not belong to her anymore. "The ultrasound confirms the baby is stable," the nurse said. She tapped the screen of her tablet. The cramping was a severe stress response. A minor placental tear from the blunt force trauma, but the bleeding has stopped. Dr. Aris requires you to stay overnight for observation, just to be safe. Nia nodded once. "Do you want me to call your husband?" She gestured toward the wall-mounted telephone. "He isn't in the waiting room. We can try his cell." "No!" The word cracked like a whip in the quiet room. The nurse jumped. The plastic tablet clicked sharply against her pen. "Are you sure?" The nurse swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "I am not alone." Nia dropped her hand to her belly. Maya rested beneath her palm. The connection between them pulsed, strong and steady. A bloodline forged in sugar and survival, backed by an empire Julian could not begin to fathom. The nurse took a slow step backward. She set a fresh hospital gown on the chair. "I'll give you a moment to change." The door closed. Nia stood up. Her bare feet touched the freezing linoleum floor. She did not shiver. She reached behind her neck. She unclasped the delicate gold chain Julian had given her on their wedding day. The metal felt dirty against her skin. She let it slip through her fingers. It hit the floor with a hollow, metallic ping. She unzipped the ruined cream dress. The blood-stained silk pooled around her ankles. She stepped out of the wreckage. She pulled the rough cotton hospital gown over her shoulders. She tied the strings at her waist. She walked over to the rolling tray table. She picked up the black card. She slid it into the pocket of the gown. She walked to the small window overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city stretched out before her, a glittering grid of lights and blind ambition. Somewhere out there, Julian was pouring expensive champagne. Chloe was laughing. They were celebrating their victory. They were toasting to the destruction of a nameless line cook. They had no idea. They had just stolen a recipe patented 20 years ago by Marcus Holloway. They had just publicly humiliated the sole heiress to a billion-dollar culinary syndicate. Her chin rose. Her shoulders pulled back. The devastating silence settled into her bones. She did not need to scream. She did not need to beg. She would let them celebrate. She would let Julian build his throne on stolen sugar. She would let Chloe parade through Chicago in her red silk dresses. She would wait. He had signed his own ruin. Miles away, Julian arrived home. The solid thud of the mahogany penthouse door echoed through the 80-story suite. Julian dropped his platinum keys onto the black marble console. He rolled his shoulders. The midnight charcoal fabric of his bespoke jacket shifted over his back. He exhaled a long, heavy breath. A slow, venomous grin stretched across his face. He walked to the wet bar. The crystal stopper of the crystal cognac decanter chimed against the glass neck. Amber liquid splashed into a heavy crystal tumbler. He did not pour a second glass. He drank it straight. The burn hit the back of his throat. He poured another. "Did you see her face?" Chloe stepped out of the private elevator. The heavy red silk of her halter dress scraped against the Persian rug. She tossed her jewel-encrusted clutch onto the Italian leather sofa. The thick gold bangles stacked up to her elbows rattled like a chain-link fence. She looked like a deer on the highway. Chloe laughed. The sound bounced off the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. She walked to the wet bar. She picked up a slender crystal flute. She reached for the vintage champagne, resting in the silver ice bucket. "Leave the champagne." Julian loosened his silk tie. "We are drinking the King's Cognac tonight." He poured a generous splash into a second tumbler and slid it across the marble counter. Chloe picked it up. She swirled the amber liquid. The diamond-crusted pendant rested in the hollow of her collarbone, catching the dim ambient lighting of the penthouse. The way she fell. Julian tipped his head back. The way she scrambled on the floor. It was a masterpiece of public relations, Chloe. We could not have scripted a better exit. She made it easy. Chloe opened her phone. The screen illuminated her dark, glossed lips. She swiped twice. She tapped a message thread from a private medical courier. A brief, satisfied smirk flashed across her face before she locked the screen and set the device face down on the marble counter. The blogs are already running the footage. Chloe tapped her long acrylic nails against the glass tumbler. Liam uploaded the raw clip 10 minutes ago. Sterling patisserie. Head chef robbed by pregnant wife. It has 2 million views. They are calling her a parasite. They are calling you a martyr. Julian unbuttoned his suit jacket. He walked to the massive oak desk anchoring the center of the room. A thick stack of legal documents sat flush against the edge of the leather blotter. He ran his fingertips over the heavy parchment. "We secured the empire." Julian flipped the top page open. The bold heading of a non-disclosure agreement stared back at him. Beneath it lay the forged trademark applications. The backdated filings held firm. Julian traced his own signature on the paper. "My lawyer pushed them through the patent office last week. The Heritage Honey Cake is registered to Julian Sterling. Nia has zero legal claim to the recipe she whispered to me in bed. Absolutely zero." He picked up the forged trademark application. He held the heavy parchment up to the light of the chandelier. "Do you know what her fatal flaw was, Chloe?" Chloe ran her acrylic nail along the rim of her glass. "Her wardrobe?" "Her loyalty," Julian scoffed. "She thought a marriage license was an equity share. She spent 2 years burning her forearms on those industrial ovens. She stayed until 3 in the morning whisking that heavy cream because she believed in the romance of the bakery. She believed we were building a legacy." He tossed the parchment back onto the desk. The paper slapped against the leather blotter. "I believed in the profit margin." Julian leaned over the desk. "She baked to feed people. I baked to own people. That is why she is bleeding on a hospital cot right now, and I am standing in a $10 million penthouse." Chloe walked over to the desk. The red silk dress hugged her curves. She leaned over the edge of the oak wood. And the divorce papers? Filed. Julian flipped to the third document in the stack. I froze the joint accounts at 8 o'clock tonight. Her personal debit cards will decline by midnight. She cannot access a single dime of the patisserie's revenue. She cannot hire a lawyer. She cannot rent an apartment. Julian tapped the bottom paragraph of the final page. I even instructed Davis to file an emergency custody block. Once she delivers, she will have no home, no income, and no reputation. The court will hand Maya straight to me. I will raise the child in my image. Nia will be a ghost. Chloe straightened her posture. The gold bangles clanked against the wood. You are keeping the baby. It was not a question. Her voice dropped a fraction of an octave. She stared at Julian's dark eyes. A sterling heir is good for the brand, Julian smirked. A single father, betrayed by his scheming wife, raising his daughter alone while building a culinary empire. The public will eat it up. The investors will double their capital. It is the perfect narrative. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest. The red silk stretched tight across her ribs. I did not spend the last 8 months forging corporate emails and feeding gossip to the press just to play stepmother to a line cook's child. Julian's jaw tightened. He set his glass on the desk. He stepped around the oak furniture. He stood inches from Chloe. The scent of his sandalwood and bergamot cologne filled the tight space between them. You will play whatever role I assign you. I am not one of your kitchen staff, Julian. Chloe did not back down. She matched his stare. Her ambition matched his own hollow greed. I handed you the Vanguard Award tonight. She tapped her chest. I built the smear campaign. I drafted the fake NDA. I planted the recipe cards in her locker. You are the undisputed king of Chicago because I built your throne. I want my crown. Julian studied her face. He admired her ruthlessness. It mirrored his own reflection. Nia had always been too soft, too focused on the flour and the yeast. Nia cared about the warmth of the oven. Chloe cared about the cold, hard equity. What do you want? 30%. Chloe traced the rim of her cognac glass. 30% ownership of Sterling Patisserie, a seat on the executive board, and my name on the lease for the new Magnificent Mile location. Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You overreach. I hold the original copies of the forged emails. Chloe smiled. The expression lacked all warmth. I hold the text messages where you asked me how to recreate the backdated trademark stamp. I hold the receipts, Julian. 30% is a bargain. Julian's eyes darkened. He saw the trap. He respected the snare. You are a dangerous woman, Ms. Vance. I am your equal. Chloe leaned closer. Her lips hovered an inch from his jaw. Nia was a weight around your neck. She lacked vision. She wanted to bake bread for the neighborhood. I want a franchise across 3 continents. I am the partner you need. Julian looked away from her face. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glittering grid of the Chicago skyline stretched out below him, a kingdom of light and glass. He had conquered it. He had excised the weak link from his chain. The image of Nia curled on the marble floor of the atrium flashed in his mind, her hands pressing into her swollen belly, her silent, devastating stare. He felt nothing. The memory surfaced without warning. Nia is a nameless kitchen appliance I used to build my empire, and now I am unplugging her. Julian turned back to Chloe. He reached out, his large hand wrapped around the back of her neck, his fingers tangled in her dark, silk-pressed hair. 30%, Julian conceded, and the board seat. But I require loyalty, unwavering, ironclad loyalty. If you ever threaten me with those receipts again, I will destroy you just as fast. You won't have to. Chloe rested her hands flat against her stomach. Her heavy gold rings caught the amber light of the chandelier. I went to the clinic this morning. Julian froze. The air in the penthouse stilled. The distant wail of a siren bled through the thick glass of the windows. The results came back an hour before the gala. Chloe smoothed the red silk over her flat abdomen. She looked up through her dark lashes. I am 6 weeks pregnant! Julian's hand dropped from her neck. He stared at her stomach. The calculation ran behind his dark eyes. A new heir, a child born of ambition, not of sentiment. A child untainted by the South Side, untainted by Nia's suffocating humility. A true sterling. Are you certain? I saw the ultrasound. Chloe smiled, a soft, fabricated expression of maternal grace. Our bloodline, Julian, a true partnership. We don't need Nia's child. We can send the girl to the state. We will have our own. Julian exhaled. A booming, triumphant laugh erupted from his chest. He grabbed Chloe by the waist. He lifted her off the Persian rug. He spun her once, the red silk flying out around her legs in a vibrant blur. A son! Julian set her down, his hands gripped her shoulders. A sterling king! He turned away. He paced toward the panoramic window. His mind raced with the possibilities. A unified front. The ultimate power couple commanding the Chicago culinary scene. He pulled his phone from his trouser pocket. We need to accelerate the timeline. Julian scrolled through his contacts. I will not have my new child tied up in a messy divorce proceeding. Nia needs to be erased by Friday. Chloe watched his back. She picked up the crystal flute of vintage champagne she had abandoned earlier. She did not reach for the water. She did not reach for the juice. She lifted the cold, carbonated alcohol to her glossed lips. She drank half the glass in one long swallow. She set the empty flute back on the silver tray. The crystal chimed. Julian did not hear it. He pressed the phone to his ear. The call connected on the second ring. Davis, Julian barked into the receiver. Execute the asset freeze. File the divorce decree with the emergency clauses. Empty the joint accounts into the offshore holding firm. Do it right now. He listened to the lawyer's response. I don't care what the penalty is. Julian's voice dropped into a lethal register. I want her locked out of the system. If she tries to access the clinic funds for her medical bills tonight, I want the card declined. Starve her out. He ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. He stood before the massive window. The dark glass reflected the sprawling, empty space of the penthouse behind him, a vast monument to his own ruthless ambition. He saw the oak desk holding the forged documents. He saw the empty crystal decanter. He saw the woman in the blood-red dress. She had handed him the keys to the kingdom. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks. He reached for his tumbler of cognac resting on the sill. The amber liquid glowed in the ambient light. He looked at his own reflection. He raised the heavy glass. He toasted the king. He had already won. The dark hours slipped away. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan. The floor-to-ceiling glass of the Sterling Patisserie executive boardroom fractured the morning light into sharp, golden splinters. Julian sat at the head of the black walnut table. His midnight charcoal suit jacket hung over the back of his chair. 3 corporate attorneys in matching navy pinstripes sat across from him. They did not speak. They pushed a succession of heavy, cream-colored vellum folders across the polished wood. Julian uncapped his silver fountain pen. Ho! The heavy nib scratched against the thick parchment. He signed the asset freeze. He signed the eviction notice for the Gold Coast condominium. He signed the emergency injunction blocking all access to the corporate accounts. The legal documents formed a neat, insurmountable wall of ruin. The lawyers moved with practiced surgical precision. They did not care about the pregnant woman recovering in a triage ward. They cared about billable hours and asset protection. Julian appreciated their cold efficiency. The joint accounts are drained. The lead attorney slid the final folder forward. The funds are sitting in the offshore holding LLC. Her personal debit cards were deactivated at midnight. We sent a courier to the impound lot to reclaim the white luxury sedan. She cannot pay for a cup of coffee this morning. His lungs expanded. He owned the air in the room. The aroma of fresh espresso and expensive leather filled the cold space. He capped the pen. The silver metal clicked sharp and loud. He handed the stack of signed execution orders back to the lawyer. And the hospital bills? Julian leaned back. Flagged and rejected, the attorney replied, tapping the vellum cover. Any charges originating from Northwestern Memorial will bounce back to the patient. She has no insurance under the corporate umbrella as of 6 hours ago. She is carrying the full liability. Excellent. Julian stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the glass window overlooking the awakening city. The empire was secure. The parasite was excised. Back at the hospital, reality set in. The fluorescent lights of the hospital billing department buzzed. The sound mirrored the swarm of hornets trapped behind Nia's temples. She stood at the granite counter. She wore a pair of oversized gray hospital scrub pants and a thin white cotton sweatshirt provided by the overnight nursing staff. The sleeves swallowed her hands. The rough fabric chafed her collarbone. The dried blood on her cream silk dress had hardened into a stiff, permanent shell, forcing her to abandon it in the biohazard bin of the maternity ward. She slid her platinum credit card across the counter. The billing clerk typed a code into the keypad. She swiped the magnetic strip. The machine beeped a harsh, flat red tone. Declined. Nia blinked. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out her navy blue debit card. She set it on the granite. Try this one. The clerk swiped the blue plastic. The machine flashed red again. The clerk looked up. Her eyes softened with a familiar, suffocating pity. The quiet humiliation of a declined card hung in the sterile air between them. The clerk pushed the cards across the smooth stone. Other patients walked past them, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The world kept turning while Nia's life collapsed into dust. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. It says the account is frozen. Do you have another form of payment? Nia took the cards back. The plastic felt heavy, useless. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her scrub pants. She pulled it out. 7 automated alerts from her bank stacked across the cracked glass screen. The screen displayed the warnings. Account access revoked. Insufficient funds. Overdraft warning. She stared at the screen. The memory of his voice from the atrium echoed through the buzz of the fluorescent lights. The memory surfaced without warning. Nia is a nameless kitchen appliance I used to build my empire, and now I am unplugging her. Her thumb hovered over the power button. Maya rolled beneath the waistband of the borrowed scrub pants. A firm, rolling push against Nia's lower abdomen, the baby demanded space in a shrinking world. Nia placed her hand over the swell of her stomach. She rubbed her thumb in a slow circle against the white cotton. She closed her eyes. She breathed through the lingering ache in her pelvis. "Bill me." The clerk printed a long paper receipt. Nia folded it without looking at the six-figure total. She walked away from the counter. The automatic glass doors of the lobby parted. The frigid Chicago wind hit her face like an open palm. Nia shivered. The white sweatshirt offered no protection against the October chill. She walked toward the circular valet driveway. She needed to retrieve her car. She needed the warm leather seats and the quiet isolation of the cabin to plan her next move. Her white luxury sedan was not parked in the VIP loop. A woman stood by the concrete valet pillar. "Simone!" Nia stopped. Simone was her sous chef. She had spent the last 3 Thanksgivings at Nia's dining table, laughing over burnt pecan pies and drinking cheap wine out of mismatched glasses. Simone wore her pristine white chef's coat with the Sterling Patisserie logo embroidered in gold thread on the breast pocket. The crisp fabric mocked the stained, borrowed hospital clothes hanging off Nia's frame. She held a battered cardboard box. Nia walked up to the pillar. The wind whipped her loose hair across her cheeks. Simone held out the box. Nia looked down. The cardboard contained her grandmother's wooden spoon, stained purple from years of wild blueberry compote, her worn, leather-bound recipe journal, a pair of non-slip kitchen shoes, a framed photograph from their wedding day. The locks on the condo were changed at 4 this morning. Simone kept her eyes focused on the hospital driveway. She refused to look at Nia's face. "Security boxed up your locker." "Julian told me to drop this off before my shift." Nia did not take the box. "Simone!" "Don't do that." Simone swallowed hard. Her knuckles turned white against the cardboard edges. "Don't look at me like that. Julian offered me the head baker position. He gave me a 4% equity stake and doubled my salary. I have $80,000 in culinary school debt." Nia stood still. The betrayal sank into her chest, cold and heavy as wet sand, pulling her under a rising tide of grief she refused to let Simone see. "I taught you how to laminate dough." "You taught me how to bake." Simone finally met Nia's eyes. The guilt in her stare hardened into defensive pride. "Julian is teaching me how to survive. You were always just baking for the romance of it, Nia. You didn't care about the profit. You didn't care about the brand. He is building a franchise. I need this." Simone shoved the box into Nia's hands. The sudden weight forced Nia to step back. She braced her core to support the awkward load. "I'm sorry, but I can't go down with you." Simone turned around. She walked down the sidewalk, her white chef's coat disappearing into the morning commuter crowd. Nia clutched the box to her chest. The rough cardboard scraped against the white cotton sweatshirt. She stood alone among the exhaust fumes and the blaring taxi horns. A black luxury SUV glided to a stop at the curb. The heavy doors unlocked with a sharp mechanical thud. Julian stepped onto the pavement. He wore his dark, bespoke suit. The morning sun caught the platinum links at his wrists. Chloe emerged from the passenger side. She wore a floor-length red cashmere coat over her red silk dress. Thick gold hoop earrings swung against her jawline. The red wool contrasted with the gray concrete and the dreary hospital facade. Julian held a thick ivory envelope. He walked toward Nia. The gravel crunched beneath his polished Italian leather shoes. Nia stepped backward. She shifted the cardboard box to her left hip. Her right hand flattened against her belly, shielding Maya from the towering shadow of the man approaching them. She raised her chin. She refused to shrink. Julian looked at the oversized scrub pants. He looked at the cardboard box. A dark, hollow amusement danced in his eyes. He surveyed the wreckage he had orchestrated. Look at the great culinary prodigy. He tapped the ivory envelope against the top of the box. The heavy paper landed over her grandmother's recipe journal. Divorce papers, custody filings, and a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of the patisserie. Nia did not blink. Her silence stretched over the noise of the idling engine. Her quiet dignity infuriated him more than any screaming match ever could. I had the storage unit on the south side cleared out this morning. Julian leaned closer. The scent of sandalwood and bergamot turned her stomach, reminding her of a man who no longer existed. Your grandmother's rusted cast iron pans, the photo albums, the extra recipe boxes. The junk removal team threw it all in the incinerator. A muscle feathered in Nia's jaw. She tightened her grip on the box. Chloe stepped up beside Julian. The red cashmere brushed against his dark sleeve. She smiled at Nia. She placed one hand over her own flat stomach, tapping her acrylic nails against the red wool. A silent, venomous claim. You made a mistake trying to steal from me. Julian's voice dropped. The venom coated every syllable, sharp and unforgiving. You thought you were crucial. You thought the flower couldn't rise without your hands. But look at you now, a pregnant line cook begging for validation on the sidewalk. Tate. He gestured to the concrete driveway. He gestured to her ruined clothes. You have nothing. You are nothing. The wind howled off the lake. Nia trembled. The cold seeped through her thin hospital pants, settling into her aching joints. She stood freezing on the concrete, clutching a cardboard box of scraps. He looked toward the hospital lobby doors. He didn't enter. He turned away. He followed the mistress instead. Chloe laughed. The metallic sound carried through the cold air. She slid into the leather passenger seat. Julian shut the door. The luxury SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy Chicago traffic. The exhaust fumes faded into the wind. Nia stood alone on the valet loop. The morning commuters rushed past her, clutching hot coffee cups and briefcases. Nobody looked at the woman in the oversized hospital clothes. Nobody saw the billion-dollar bloodline she carried. She walked to a concrete bench near the bus stop. She sat down. The cold stone bit through her thin pants. She rested the cardboard box on the bench beside her. She placed both hands over her belly, sharing the faint warmth of her palms with the baby resting inside. Maya kicked twice in rapid succession, a steadfast reminder of the life depending on her resilience. The ivory envelope lay on top of her grandmother's journal. She did not open it. She knew what it contained. It meant erasure. Julian had taken her home. He had taken her money. He had taken her legacy. He thought he had stripped her bare. Nia reached into the deep pocket of the hospital scrub pants. Her fingers brushed against the thick black cardstock. She pulled it out. The tiny silver camera emblem caught the morning light. The gold foil numbers gleamed against the matte black background. She pulled out her phone. She entered the 10 digits. The line connected. 1 ring sounded. Then 2. Before the 3rd ring sounded, the concrete walkway vanished. A jagged, white-hot tear ripped across Nia's lower abdomen. The phone slipped from her fingers. The glass screen shattered against the icy pavement. She fell to her knees. The rough gravel bit through the thin hospital scrub pants, scraping her skin. She gasped. The freezing October wind sucked the air from her lungs. She wrapped both arms around the tight, seizing mound of her belly. Maya thrashed. A sudden, terrifying gush of warm fluid soaked through the gray cotton trousers, pooling onto the frost-covered sidewalk. Blood and amniotic fluid stained the gray stone. Wheelchair. We need a wheelchair outside now. A security guard in a heavy neon yellow parka sprinted through the automatic glass doors. The radio clipped to his shoulder squawked. The heavy thud of his combat boots vibrated through the concrete beneath Nia's palms. She could not speak, her jaw locked against the blinding agony radiating from her spine. They lifted her. The canvas seat of the wheelchair sagged under her weight. The rubber tires squealed against the polished linoleum of the lobby. The harsh overhead fluorescent lights blurred into a continuous, punishing streak of white. Severe placental abruption, 29 weeks. Operating room 2 needs to be prepped 5 minutes ago. The triage nurse ran alongside the chair. Her rubber-soled shoes squeaked. She pressed a thick gauze pad against Nia's inner thighs. The fabric soaked through in seconds. The metallic scent of copper and the sterile bite of bleach filled the tight corridor. Nia squeezed her eyes shut. She focused on the erratic, fluttering kicks against her ribs. Maya was fighting. Maya was suffocating. The double doors of the surgical wing swung open. Julian stood in the center of the hallway. His dark, bespoke suit absorbed the harsh hospital lighting. He held a sleek black leather portfolio. Chloe leaned against his shoulder. She wore the floor-length red cashmere coat. Her heavy gold hoop earrings swung as she chewed a piece of peppermint gum. They had not left the hospital. They had gone to the executive billing office. The gurney wheels locked. The nurses halted to navigate the tight intersection. Julian! Nia choked on the name. It scraped her dry throat. Her fingers clamped around the metal handrail of the gurney. Her knuckles turned bone white. She needed him to see the blood. She needed him to see the child he claimed to want, dying on a canvas stretcher. Julian looked down at the soaked gray scrubs. He looked at the trail of crimson droplets tracking across the pristine white floor tiles. His expression did not shift. The vein in his temple did not rise. He unzipped the leather portfolio. The billing department just informed me you attempted to use the corporate card. He dropped a thick stack of stapled legal documents onto Nia's chest. The heavy paper landed right above her seizing belly. I had my attorney draft an emergency waiver. Julian tapped the top page. His platinum cufflinks caught the fluorescent light. Sign away your parental rights to the child, and I will authorize the corporate account to cover this surgical theater. Refuse, and these fine doctors will have to transfer you to the county clinic down the street. I hear their mortality rate is quite educational. Chloe laughed. The sound sliced through the sterile air, loud and jarring against the quiet urgency of the surgical wing. She adjusted the lapels of her bright red coat. The vibrant scarlet wool screamed against the muted blues and greens of the medical staff. It was the color of a cocktail lounge. It was the color of slaughter. Julian, the smell is atrocious. Chloe pinched her nose with 2 long acrylic nails. Make her sign it quickly. We have the tasting menu for the Magnificent Mile location in an hour. I refuse to carry the scent of a public ward into a Michelin kitchen. Nia's vision tunneled. The roaring in her ears drowned out the beeping monitors. The pain tore through her pelvis again, a serrated blade twisting in her nerves. She pushed the papers off her chest. They fluttered to the bloody floor. "Get out of the way!" A woman's voice cut the tension like a scalpel. A senior surgical nurse stepped in front of the gurney. She wore deep navy scrubs. Her thick silver hair was pulled back into a tight, immaculate bun. A solid gold pin shaped like a wheat stalk resting on her breast pocket caught the hall light. She did not wear a standard hospital ID badge. She stepped into Julian's personal space. She shoved his chest. Julian stumbled backward. His Italian leather shoes squeaked on the tile. "Do not touch me," his voice boomed. "I am Julian Sterling. I own—" "You own nothing in this corridor." The nurse did not blink. Her brown eyes locked onto his face with cold, surgical precision. "The patient's medical expenses have been secured by a private endowment. She is a priority 1 VIP. If you or this woman in the cheap red coat impede my surgical path again, my security team will break your jaw and drag you to the curb." Julian froze. His eyes flicked to the heavy-set men in dark suits standing 50 feet down the hall. They had not been there a moment ago. Chloe stopped chewing her gum. Her hand dropped from her nose. The senior nurse turned back to the gurney. She placed a warm, steady hand on Nia's forehead. "We have you, Miss Holloway." The name washed over Nia like a warm tide. The nurse released the wheel locks. The gurney surged forward, bursting through the swinging double doors into the blinding white sanctuary of the operating theater. The cold hit her first. The surgical suite felt like a meat locker. Stainless steel tables gleamed under massive, saucer-shaped halogen lights. The room smelled of sharp ozone, iodine, and clean plastic. They shifted her onto the narrow operating table. The transfer jarred her spine. A fresh wave of agony seized her stomach. She arched her back, her mouth opening in a silent, breathless scream. "Spinal block going in. Curl around your baby." Nia tucked her chin to her chest. She wrapped her arms around her stomach. A sharp pinch pierced her lower back. A rush of icy water flooded her veins, chasing the fire down her legs. The agonizing pressure in her pelvis dissolved into a heavy, terrifying numbness. A blue paper drape rose in front of her face. It blocked her view of her own body. The silence of the room was heavy, measured. The quiet clatter of steel instruments dropping into metal trays. The rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the oxygen ventilator. Nia stared at the weave of the blue fabric. Her chest heaved. She waited for the pressure. She waited for the life she had guarded so fiercely to be pulled from the wreckage. A dull, pulling sensation tugged at her sternum. They were inside. The smell of cauterized tissue drifted over the sterile drape. Smoke and copper. The mechanical suction whirred. Uterus is open, reaching for the head. Nia held her breath. The monitor beside her head beeped, a frantic, erratic rhythm. Her hands gripped the metal armrests of the surgical table. The metal bit into her palms. She needed a sound. She needed the cry. She bargained with the harsh fluorescent lights. She offered her own heartbeat, her own lungs, her own life for the child being lifted from her womb. Clear the airway. A heavy, wet slosh. The suction machine gurgled. 1 second passed. A lifetime inside a single exhalation. A sharp, furious shriek shattered the silence. The cry was loud. It was jagged and raw, vibrating with the sheer force of survival. It bounced off the stainless steel walls. It pierced the sterile air. It was the most beautiful sound Nia had ever heard. Tears spilled over her dark lashes. They tracked through the dried sweat on her temples and pooled in her ears. Time of birth, 18 minutes to 9 in the morning. The doctor's voice softened. "You have a daughter. She is fighting mad." The senior nurse rounded the blue drape. She held a tiny bundle wrapped in a heated white cotton blanket. She lowered the child to Nia's chest. Maya weighed 4 pounds and 6 ounces. She felt like a feather resting against Nia's collarbone. The newborn's skin was translucent, flushed a deep pink, and covered in a slick, white layer of vernix. Maya smelled of warm iron, salt water, and sweet dough. Her tiny fists were curled tight. Her eyes were squeezed shut against the harsh operating lights. The heat radiating from the infant's small body seeped through the thin hospital gown, warming the cold, hollow space in Nia's chest. Nia brought a trembling hand up. She traced the shell of Maya's tiny ear. "I'm here!" Her voice broke. She pressed her lips to the damp crown of the baby's head. Maya's crying slowed into a rhythmic, exhausted whimpering. The bond snapped into place. A chain, forged in blood, sealed in the freezing air of the surgical suite. Julian had tried to destroy them. Chloe had tried to erase them. But the child breathing against her throat was real. The child was a survivor. The hours blurred into a quiet, heavily medicated haze. Midnight painted the window of the VIP recovery suite a deep, impenetrable black. The room was expansive. Rich mahogany paneling replaced the sterile white tiles. A velvet armchair sat in the corner. The scent of fresh orchids masked the lingering smell of rubbing alcohol. The senior nurse had vanished, leaving only a specialized neonatal team to monitor the incubator stationed right beside the bed. Maya rested in Nia's arms. The feeding tubes and heart monitors had been removed. The baby was small, but her lungs were clear. She breathed in soft, even puffs against the silk trim of Nia's fresh gown. The hospital was dead quiet. The rhythmic beep of the vital sign monitor provided the only sound. The isolation settled over Nia's shoulders. The adrenaline drained from her system, leaving a vast, echoing emptiness in its wake. She traced the tiny blue veins visible beneath Maya's translucent skin. She thought of the empire her husband had stolen. She thought of the legacy he claimed as his own. The memory surfaced without warning. Nia is a nameless kitchen appliance I used to build my empire, and now I am unplugging her. The words floated up from the dark water of her memory. They carried no anger. They carried a cold, permanent truth. She had let him reduce her. She had shrunk herself to fit inside his ego. Outside the heavy oak door of the recovery suite, the corridor remained dim. Julian stood by the doorframe. He stared through the narrow rectangular glass pane. He watched Nia cradle the newborn in the quiet darkness of the room. He did not touch the brass handle. "Julian, the car is waiting!" Chloe's voice echoed from the elevator bank. Julian turned his back to the glass. He walked down the hall. Inside the room, Maya shifted. Her tiny hand uncurled. Her impossibly small fingers wrapped around Nia's index finger. The grip was weak, but it anchored Nia to the earth. Nia stopped crying. She wiped the last trace of moisture from her cheek. She looked at the city lights glowing through the window. The Chicago skyline belonged to her father. The flour, the yeast, the sugar, the patents. They were Holloway assets. Julian thought he had unplugged a machine. He had no idea he had just awakened the architect of the power grid. He stroked Maya's warm back. She studied the steady rise and fall of her daughter's chest. The silence in the room stretched out, thick with a dangerous, calculating peace. The fear was gone. The hesitation was dead. She knew exactly what she had to do. She held the Holloway air. Outside, the weather turned violent. The midnight quiet of the VIP recovery suite pressed against the heavy mahogany doors. rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the 8th floor window, a chaotic drumbeat against the silence of the room. The storm outside battered the Chicago skyline, washing the city in gray, jagged sheets of water. Inside, the air smelled of bleached linen and hot dust from the baseboard heater. A single amber reading lamp cast a bruised halo over the hospital bed. The private endowment had upgraded her to the prestige wing. The walls were lined in dark mahogany, a stark contrast to the sterile white triage bay where she had bled on the floor. A plush velvet armchair sat empty in the corner. The brass fixtures on the bathroom door gleamed in the dim light. It was a room designed for billionaires and diplomats. It was a room her father would have approved of. Nia stared at the empty velvet chair. Julian had never sat in it. He had stood in the hallway, tossed the custody papers onto her seizing belly, and walked away with a woman wearing red cashmere. Nia lay flat on her back. The dull, persistent ache of the spinal block throbbed at the base of her spine. The surgical incision burned beneath the thick cotton bandages wrapping her lower abdomen. Every shallow breath pulled at the fresh stitches. She did not ask for painkillers. She needed the sting. She needed the sharp, physical reminder of the slaughter she had just survived. Maya rested on her chest. The 4-pound newborn was a fragile, breathing weight against Nia's collarbone. A heated white cotton blanket swaddled the infant. Maya's skin was paper-thin, flushed a deep, mottled pink. Tiny blue veins mapped the delicate shell of her ear. She smelled of warm iron, milk, and sweet dough. Her small fingers curled into tight fists. She breathed in rapid, shallow puffs. Every exhalation fluttered the silk trim of Nia's hospital gown. Nia rested her left hand over the small, steady rise of her daughter's back. The skin of Nia's own knuckles was tight, bruised purple from the IV needles. She stared at the ceiling. The acoustic tiles formed a rigid, inescapable grid. She traced the geometric lines with her eyes. She calculated the hours. Julian had frozen the accounts at midnight. He had served the divorce papers at dawn. He had left her bleeding on the concrete. Lightning flashed over Lake Michigan, illuminating the room for a fraction of a second in stark, cold white. In that flash, Nia saw her own reflection in the dark television screen mounted on the wall. She looked nothing like the polished, submissive wife Julian had paraded through the gala. Her hair was loose and wild. Her face was hollowed out by exhaustion and blood loss. She looked like a predator backed into a corner. Julian believed a backdated trademark application erased 20 years of history. He did not know about the original patent. He did not know that her father had secured the rights to that exact ratio of burnt sugar and scraped vanilla bean before Julian ever learned how to hold a whisk. Chloe Vance had spent months forging corporate emails. She had built a fortress of lies on top of a landmine. The cracked smartphone sat on the rolling metal tray beside her bed. The shattered glass face caught the amber light. Liam Chen's black card rested right beneath it. The gold foil numbers gleamed. She reached out. Her bruised fingers closed around the cold metal chassis of the phone. The device felt heavy, a brick of useless plastic and silicon. Her personal bank app remained locked. Her email password had been changed. She had no home. She had no flour. She had no ovens. She heard his voice again. The memory surfaced without warning. Nia is a nameless kitchen appliance. I used to build my empire, and now I am unplugging her. The words slipped through the dark water of her memory. They did not burn. They froze. They coated her ribs in a thick, permanent layer of ice. She had let him do it. She had folded her own wings so he could fly. She opened the phone's keypad. The shattered screen dug into the pad of her thumb. She stared at the glowing numbers. She had not dialed these 10 digits in 3 years. The memory surfaced, vivid and heavy. She had packed a single canvas duffel bag. She had walked out of the massive wrought iron gates of the Holloway estate in the pouring rain. She had traded a billion-dollar culinary syndicate for a cramped South Side apartment. She had wanted to earn her place. She had wanted a man to look at her flour-stained hands and love her for her raw talent, not for the boundless wealth attached to her last name. She had chosen the romance of the bakery over the cold strategy of the boardroom. She was wrong. Her humility had been a weapon handed to a thief. Julian did not love the flower. Julian loved the crown. He had used her body to build a stepping stone, and when he reached the top, he had kicked it away. She pressed the numbers. 9, then 1, then 4. Her hands shook. The plastic edge of the phone rattled against her gold wedding band. She stopped. She looked down at her left hand. The thin gold band caught the dim light. The ring had cost $800. They had bought it at a pawn shop during their first year of business. She had worn it with pride. She had defended it when the wealthy patrons at the patisserie stared at her bare, flour-stained hands. Now, the metal burned her skin. It was a collar. It was a lie, forged in a sweltering commercial kitchen. She pinched the metal between her right thumb and forefinger. She pulled. The ring scraped over her swollen knuckle. She dropped it onto the rolling metal tray. It landed next to Liam's black card with a dull, hollow click. She finished dialing. She pressed the green icon. She lifted the phone to her ear. The plastic casing felt cold against her cheek. The line clicked. A low, hissing static filled the earpiece. It rang once, a sharp, digital tone. It rang twice. The connection snapped open. The silence on the other end was not empty. It was vast. It carried the weight of 100 boardrooms, the crushing gravity of a man who moved markets with a single signature. It tasted of expensive cigars and aged scotch. "Dad!" Her voice cracked. The single syllable tore her throat. A tear broke free, hot and fast, tracking down her cheek to pool in the hollow of her collarbone. "It's me!" The heavy, rhythmic breathing on the other end paused. "I know," the baritone voice vibrated through the tiny speaker. It bypassed her ears and settled straight into her bones. There was no surprise. There was no hesitation. Just an anchor dropping into a stormy sea. "I need you. I never stopped watching over you." Nia squeezed her eyes shut. She pressed her hand flat against Maya's warm back. The baby shifted. The tiny legs kicked against the swaddle. The movement was weak, a fraction of the power she had possessed inside Nia's belly, but it was stubborn. She had survived the placental abruption. She had survived the frigid air of the surgical theater. She possessed the Holloway resilience. Maya turned her tiny face into the hollow of Nia's neck. The soft, rhythmic flutter of the newborn's heart beat against Nia's skin. The connection grounded her. The bloodline held firm. They took the recipe. They took paper. Julian locked the accounts. He filed for sole custody. He left us on the pavement. The static hummed. The silence turned lethal. It sharpened into a blade. The air pressure in the hospital room seemed to drop. He declared war on a ghost. Nia opened her eyes. The amber light of the reading lamp reflected in her dark irises. She pulled her shoulders back against the sterile pillows. Her chin rose. The ice around her ribs began to thaw, replaced by a slow, rising heat, the heat of a Holloway. I have the baby. She is safe. Name: Maya. A heavy exhale filled the earpiece, the sound of a man bearing the weight of a new generation, the architect acknowledging his heir. Send me the address. He thinks I am nothing. He is a dead man breathing. The line went dead. Nia lowered the phone. She sat in the quiet. The dial tone buzzed from the speaker before the screen timed out and faded to black. She had run from that world for 3 years. She had hidden her identity behind aprons and flour dust. She had let a mediocre man silence her to protect his fragile ego. She set the phone back on the metal tray next to her discarded wedding band. The storm outside raged, but the hospital room held its breath. The tectonic plates beneath the Chicago culinary scene had just fractured. Julian was standing on a fault line he could not see. She looked down at Maya. The infant slept. Her tiny, translucent eyelids twitched. The feathery eyelashes rested against flushed cheeks. Maya's small mouth opened in a silent, milky yawn. The sweet scent of warm iron and dough rose from the child. A Holloway, the true heir to a legacy forged in cramped kitchens and billion-dollar boardrooms. Julian wanted to hand this child over to the state. Chloe wanted to erase her to make room for a new heir. Chloe had stood in the hospital corridor rubbing her own flat stomach, smiling at the blood trailing down Nia's legs. The audacity of their cruelty fueled the slow-burning fire in Nia's chest. They had no idea who they had just attempted to bury. Nia brushed her thumb over the soft, dark down on Maya's head. The corners of Nia's mouth twitched. The movement felt foreign. Her lips parted. For the first time since the microphone shrieked in the crystal atrium, a smile touched her face. It was not a smile of joy. It was the terrifying, beautiful smile of a woman who just handed the executioner a sword. She owned the board. The corridor outside remained dark. Footsteps echoed on the linoleum. Heavy, deliberate, rhythmic. The leather soles slapped against the polished floor, growing louder with every second. They bypassed the nurse's station. They bypassed the empty triage bays. They carried the unmistakable cadence of intent. Nia did not flinch. She kept her hand resting flat against Maya's back. The footsteps stopped. A shadow fell across the narrow, rectangular glass pane of the heavy oak door. The door handle turned. The heavy oak door swung inward. It did not creak. Marcus Holloway crossed the threshold. The storm outside seemed to bleed into the VIP recovery suite. He wore a midnight charcoal cashmere overcoat draped over a tailored double-breasted designer suit. The dark wool drank the ambient amber light of the reading lamp. Raindrops glistened on his broad shoulders. The intricate stitching of his lapel bespoke the kind of wealth that did not shout, but commanded absolute silence. He stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall. His presence devoured the oxygen. He bypassed the humming medical equipment. He ignored the lavish floral arrangements crowding the mahogany tables. His gaze locked onto the hospital bed. 10 men flooded the corridor behind him. They moved with terrifying, silent precision. They wore matching slate, gray and black designer suits. They carried slim, matte black leather briefcases. They formed a solid, impenetrable wall of corporate lethality, blocking the hallway, silencing the nurses, shutting down the entire prestige wing. The hospital staff retreated into the shadows. Nobody questioned the invasion. Nia shifted her gaze to the rain-streaked window. 80 feet below, 4 black luxury sedans idled in the ambulance loading zone. Their bright LED headlights sliced through the Chicago downpour, casting long white beams across the wet asphalt. Armed security personnel in dark raincoats flanked the vehicles, their hands resting over communication earpieces. The hospital administration had not called a tow truck. The city police cruisers passed by without slowing. Nobody tows the chairman of Holloway Foods. Marcus walked to the edge of the mattress. He stopped. He peeled off his black leather gloves, one finger at a time. The scent of rain, rich tobacco, and old money overpowered the sterile odor of hospital bleach. He studied Nia's face. He cataloged the bruised hollows beneath her eyes. He traced the raw scrape along her jawline where she had hit the marble table. He noted the unnatural pallor of her warm brown skin. Every injury was recorded. Every drop of spilled blood was added to a ledger Julian Sterling could never afford to pay. His jaw flexed. The thick muscles in his neck pulled tight. He looked down. Maya slept on Nia's chest. The newborn breathed in soft, rhythmic puffs. Her tiny, translucent fingers gripped the edge of the heated white cotton blanket. She was a 4-pound survivor anchored to a battered queen. Marcus reached out. His massive, calloused hand hovered over the infant. He did not touch the sterile bandages wrapping Nia's abdomen. He brushed the back of his index finger against Maya's warm, downy cheek. Nia held her breath. He looked up, his dark eyes locked onto his daughter's face. "She has your mother's fighting weight." "She has your stubbornness." Marcus nodded once. A silent, ironclad pact sealed in the dim amber light. No weeping, no histrionics. Two people who understood the exact cost of the bloodline. The Holloway Syndicate did not mourn in public. They rebuilt. They conquered. Marcus turned his back to the bed. He faced the 10 litigators standing at attention in the room. "Dismantle him." The velvet armchair was shoved aside. Matte black laptops opened on the mahogany console. The room transformed from a medical sanctuary into a ruthless corporate war room. The rhythmic, rapid-fire clatter of high-speed typing replaced the quiet hum of the vital monitors. 10 minds synchronized to execute a single, devastating directive. The lead attorney, a man with a silver beard and a shark's dead stare, pressed a Bluetooth earpiece into his right ear. "Intercept the offshore transfer from Sterling Patisserie." He typed a sequence of override codes into his terminal. "Freeze the Cayman routing number. Flag the transaction as corporate fraud. Hold the capital." A younger lawyer by the window flipped open a heavy vellum file. "I have the magnificent mile leaseholder on the line. Offered triple the asking price for the commercial space. Cash. Close it in 3 minutes." A third litigator adjusted his designer tie. He stared at a sprawling spreadsheet mapping the Chicago culinary supply lines. "Revoke the flour and sugar supply contracts to all 3 Sterling Patisserie locations. Lock their loading docks. If they attempt to source from secondary vendors, enforce the Holloway Regional non-compete clauses. Starve his kitchens." A fourth attorney swiped across a glowing tablet. "Cancel the Madagascar vanilla import orders. Reroute the entire shipment to the Holloway Distribution Center in South Loop." Nia watched the execution. She rested her chin against the top of Maya's head. The baby shifted, her tiny feet pressing against the silk trim of Nia's hospital gown. The fierce warmth of her daughter's body anchored Nia to the mattress while her father's army eradicated the man who had abandoned them. Julian had frozen a joint checking account. Marcus was freezing the man's ability to exist in the commercial world. A fifth lawyer stood near the door. The Vanguard Award Committee is on hold. They are reviewing the unedited footage Liam Chen just submitted. They are drafting a press release to revoke the culinary honor by sunrise. Marcus stood at the foot of the bed. He watched the rain batter the glass. He checked his platinum watch. Let him walk into the snare. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Loud, careless, arrogant. The sharp, scolding baritone of Julian Sterling bled through the heavy oak door before he even reached the threshold. I said, "Move out of my way. Do you know who I am? I own the finest bakery in this city. I will have your nursing license revoked before your shift ends." "Julian, leave the staff alone." Chloe's voice followed, dripping with impatient disdain. "Just get her signature. The investors are waiting at the new site. I refuse to be late for our own victory lap." Julian strode into the room. He wore the same midnight charcoal bespoke suit from the gala. He carried a fresh manila folder. Chloe Vance flanked him. The heavy red cashmere coat hung off her shoulders. Her heavy gold bangles scraped against the wooden doorframe. She chewed a piece of peppermint gum. The sharp mint scent cut through the tobacco and rain. Julian stopped. He looked at the 10 men in designer suits. He looked at the glowing laptop screens. He looked at the silver-bearded attorney holding a stack of execution orders. Julian threw his head back and laughed. The hollow, booming sound bounced off the mahogany walls. "What is this?" Julian waved the manila folder at the room. "Did you call a bankruptcy clinic? Are these the public defenders the state assigns to indigent mothers?" Chloe sneered. She crossed her arms. The red silk dress stretched tight across her ribs. "It smells like desperation. Julian, just give the lawyers the waiver and let's go. We have a tasting menu to finalize." I refuse to stand in this crowded room any longer. Julian stepped closer to the bed. He ignored the men. He looked at Nia. He looked at the small, swaddled bundle resting against her collarbone. Disgust rippled across his face, curling his upper lip. "I froze every dime, Nia." Julian tapped the folder. "Your little legal aid team cannot save you. I own the Heritage Honey Cake. I own the bakery. I own the narrative. Sign the parental surrender, or I leave you here to rot with the massive medical debt." Nia did not speak. She did not flinch. She looked past Julian's shoulder. "Weh!" Marcus Holloway turned away from the window. He stepped into the center of the room. He eclipsed the amber reading lamp, casting a long, terrifying shadow over Julian's polished Italian leather shoes. "You own a very expensive pile of forged paper." Julian turned around. His arrogant grin faltered. He scanned the 6 feet and 3 inches tall titan standing before him. He registered the bespoke tailoring. He registered the cold, predatory stillness. He registered the platinum watch that cost more than his first 3 commercial bakeries combined. "Excuse me?" Julian's neck flushed dark. "Who the hell are you? Security should have cleared this floor." "I am the man who buys the building you stand in." Marcus pulled a single sheet of thick parchment from the inner pocket of his cashmere coat. He held it out. Julian did not take it. Marcus let the parchment flutter to the floor. It landed on the toes of Julian's shoes. The embossed gold seal of the United States Patent Office caught the dim light. The date stamped across the top was 20 years old. You just destroyed your own empire by accusing my daughter of stealing a recipe that my mother created and I patented 20 years before you ever touched an oven." The typing stopped. The hospital room turned silent. Julian's eyes darted from the heavy parchment to Marcus. He read the name printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the patent. Marcus Holloway, the founder of Holloway Foods, the billionaire syndicate chairman who supplied 80% of the commercial flour and sugar to the Midwest, the man who owned the massive supply chains Julian relied on to bake his daily bread. Julian's breath hitched. The thick vein in his temple throbbed. A daughter. The word slipped from his mouth, a weak, hollow sound. He turned his head. He stared at Nia. Nia sat propped against the pillows. She cradled Maya in her right arm. The baby stirred, a tiny Holloway heir resting on the chest of a culinary heiress. Nia lifted her chin. Her dark eyes held zero warmth. Her silence was a guillotine dropping on his neck. Nia Sterling. The name tumbled from his mouth. Nia Holloway. Marcus dropped his voice to a lethal register. She hid her name to protect your fragile ego. She kneaded your dough. She burned her hands on your ovens. She wanted to build a life with a man who loved her craft. Chloe stopped chewing her gum. Her gold hoop earrings stopped swinging. The smug color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a cheap mask peeling away. She stared at the 10 elite litigators surrounding them. She realized they were not public defenders. They were corporate executioners. Her mind spun. She had spent 8 months forging trademark documents. She had orchestrated a brutal public smear campaign. She had demanded 30% equity and a seat on the executive board. Now, she realized 30% of zero was zero. She had tied herself to a sinking ship. She had faked a pregnancy for a man who no longer owned the flour in his own pantry. The heavy red silk dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket. Julian took a half step backward. His polished shoe crunched the corner of the gold-sealed patent. "This is a bluff." Julian swallowed hard. "I filed the trademark. I have the receipts. My lawyers, Jam." "Your lawyers just surrendered your operating licenses." The silver-bearded attorney did not look up from his laptop. "Your offshore accounts have been seized under federal corporate fraud statutes. Your magnificent mile lease was just purchased by Holloway Holdings. You are trespassing on our property." Julian's chest heaved. He looked at the manila folder in his hands, the custody waiver, the divorce papers, the weapons he had forged to destroy a nameless line cook. He had brought a knife to a drone strike. "Nia!" Julian's voice cracked. He reached a shaking hand toward the bed. "Nia, wait! We can talk about this. The baby, our business. We built it together." Nia adjusted the white cotton blanket over Maya's shoulders. She did not look at him. She smoothed her thumb over her daughter's fragile cheek. She protected her peace. Julian's words were empty noise. She remembered lying on the cold marble floor of the crystal atrium, bleeding, while he stepped over her shattered body. She remembered his dark eyes holding zero warmth. She had begged him then. She would never speak to him again. Marcus stepped between Julian and the hospital bed. He invaded Julian's personal space. The scent of rich tobacco and impending ruin suffocated the baker. Marcus leaned in. "My daughter never needed your money." Marcus lowered his voice so only the three of them could hear the final nail being driven into the wood. "She was testing your character. You failed." Julian's jaw slacked. The arrogant posture crumbled. His broad shoulders caved inward. The bespoke charcoal suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big, hanging off the frame of a man realizing he was nothing more than a temporary squatter in a billionaire's kingdom. Chloe backed away. Her red cashmere coat brushed against the doorframe. She looked at Julian, then at the 10 men in designer suits. She reached for the heavy brass door handle behind her back, her acrylic nails scraping the cold metal. She calculated her escape. Julian stood frozen in the center of the mahogany room. His hands shook. The manila folder slipped from his grip, scattering cheap white paper across the authentic patent on the floor. He stared at the woman he had thrown onto the marble floor of the atrium. He stared at the empire he had just burned to the ground. The rain lashed the window. He could not breathe. Morning arrived without mercy. The sun stayed hidden. The crystal atrium smelled of stale champagne, industrial floor wax, and wilting orchids. The 100-foot crystal chandelier hung dead above the mahogany podium, casting fractured prisms of gray morning light across the vaulted glass ceilings. The carved swan ice sculptures anchoring the VIP tables had melted into deformed blocks of slush. Freezing water dripped onto the heavy velvet tablecloths. It hit the floor with a steady, maddening rhythm. 300 of Chicago's culinary elite sat in the same heavy oak chairs they had occupied the night before. Michelin-starred chefs, wealthy socialites, renowned food critics. Nobody touched the fresh espresso or the silver trays of pastries. Nobody spoke. The silence pressed into the pores of every person in the massive room. Julian sat at table 1. His bespoke midnight charcoal suit was wrinkled at the elbows. The platinum cufflinks dug into his wrists as he gripped the edge of the marble table. The thick vein in his temple throbbed a frantic, erratic tempo against his brown skin. He stared at the spot on the floor where his wife had shattered a pyramid of crystal champagne flutes. A faint, brown stain of dried blood still marked the white grout line. Chloe sat beside him. The heavy red silk of her halter dress stood out like an open wound against the muted morning daylight. Her heavy gold bangles rattled as her knee bounced under the table. She chewed her glossy lower lip. She kept her eyes glued to the massive oak double doors. Liam Chen stood in the center aisle. He wore his black tactical vest over a charcoal turtleneck. He did not carry his heavy videography rig. A sleek, matte black laptop rested on a rolling metal audio-visual cart in front of him. A thick audio-visual cable snaked across the marble, connecting to the 60-foot projector screen descending from the mezzanine balcony. He touched his chest right over his heart twice. He waited. The heavy oak double doors swung open. 10 corporate litigators in matching slate gray designer suits marched into the atrium. They fanned out across the room, forming a solid, impenetrable wall of corporate lethality behind the back row of tables. 4 black luxury sedans idled in the valet loop visible through the glass walls. Marcus Holloway walked through the doors. The billionaire chairman wore a midnight charcoal cashmere overcoat. The dark wool absorbed the ambient light of the room. He walked with the heavy, deliberate cadence of a man who moved markets with a single signature. He stopped at the edge of the center aisle. Nia Holloway stepped out from behind her father's shadow. She wore a tailored cream wool coat over a cream silk blouse. The fabric hung crisp and flawless against her warm brown skin. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, unforgiving knot at the nape of her neck. She held a heated white cotton blanket against her chest. Maya slept against her collarbone. The 4-pound newborn breathed in soft, rhythmic puffs. Tiny, translucent fingers gripped the lapel of the cream coat. Maya smelled of warm iron, milk, and sweet dough. Nia rested her left hand flat over the fragile curve of her daughter's back. She did not look at the blood stain on the floor. She looked at the mahogany podium. Julian pushed his chair back. The heavy wood scraped the marble. 10 designer suits stepped forward in unison. Julian froze. His Italian leather shoes remained rooted to the floor. Elias Thorne walked down the center aisle. The silver-bearded lead litigator carried a thick leather briefcase. He climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the stage. He set the briefcase on the mahogany podium. He unclasped the brass locks. The metallic click echoed over the massive speakers. He pulled out a stack of heavy vellum folders. He leaned into the silver microphone. "We are convening this emergency session of the Vanguard Award Committee." Elias's baritone voice bounced off the glass walls. "My client, Marcus Holloway, holds the foundational patents for the regional culinary supply chain. He has requested an immediate public review of the Vanguard recipients' ethics. The committee obliged." Julian gripped the table. His knuckles strained against his rich brown skin. "Ethics?" Julian scoffed. His voice lacked its usual booming resonance. "You froze my accounts. You hijacked my supply lines. This is corporate terrorism, not an ethics review." Elias did not look at him. "Call the first witness." The entire room held its breath. Simone stood up from table 4. "I!" The young sous chef wore her pristine white chef's coat with the Sterling Patisserie logo embroidered in gold thread. She walked down the center aisle. Her non-slip kitchen shoes squeaked against the marble. She stopped in front of the projector screen. She refused to look at Julian. She looked directly at Nia. "I lied." Simone's voice shook. She gripped the hem of her white coat. Julian drafted the backdated recipe cards. He planted them in Nia's locker 3 days ago. He offered me the head baker position and a 4% equity stake if I kept quiet during the gala. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Nia taught me how to laminate dough. Nia created the heritage honey cake. I sold out my mentor to pay off my culinary school debt." The crowd erupted into furious whispers. Waiters dropped their silver trays. A food critic in the front row began typing rapidly on his phone. "She is a disgruntled employee." Julian pointed a shaking finger at Simone. "I fired her this morning for incompetence. She is retaliating." His panic echoed off the glass walls. "Call the second witness." Elias turned a vellum page. The litigator did not pause. A woman in deep navy scrubs stood up from the back row. Her thick silver hair was pulled back into a tight, immaculate bun. A solid gold pin shaped like a wheat stalk rested on her breast pocket. She walked past the 10 litigators. She marched down the aisle with military precision. She stopped beside Simone. She glared at Julian. "I am the senior surgical nurse for the Northwestern Memorial Prestige Maternity Wing." She crossed her arms. "At 7 o'clock this morning, this man cornered a hemorrhaging patient in the surgical corridor." He dropped a stack of custody waivers onto her seizing stomach. He threatened to revoke her medical funding if she did not sign away her parental rights to the child she was currently losing. The collective gasp of 300 people sucked the oxygen from the atrium. An older woman at table 3 covered her mouth. The food critic stopped typing. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on Julian's broad shoulders. Julian's mouth opened. The denial lodged in his dry throat. He looked at the crowd. He saw the revulsion twisting the faces of the industry titans who had applauded him 12 hours earlier. "Mr. Chen," Elias gestured to the audio-visual cart, "play the atrium footage." The screen flickered to life immediately. Liam tapped the spacebar on his laptop. The 60-foot screen flared white. The raw, high-definition video filled the room. The audio gain was cranked high. The speakers blasted the sound of breaking glass. The crowd watched the towering pyramid of crystal champagne flutes shatter around Nia's cream-clad frame. They watched her hit the marble floor. They watched her curl into herself, both hands pressing flat against her swollen belly. The camera panned up. Julian stood over her. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks. "Pathetic." The word echoed through the atrium, digitized and amplified. On the screen, Chloe stepped over a broken flute. Her red stiletto ground the thin glass into fine powder. She wrapped her hands around Julian's waist. They walked back toward the stage. Liam tapped the spacebar. The screen went black. The silence in the room felt radioactive. It burned the back of the throat. It smelled of ozone and ruin. Chloe shrank into her oak chair. The heavy red silk felt like a cage. She wrapped her arms around her ribs, trying to hide the gold bangles. Her practiced, theatrical sympathy dissolved into raw, animal panic. Elias Thorne reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal vellum. The top page bore the official seal of the Chicago Telecommunications Tribunal. "The Vanguard Award demands integrity." Elias traced a line of text with his silver fountain pen. "It demands original brilliance." This is the official transcript of the Penthouse Security System audio, recorded at midnight, subpoenaed this morning under federal corporate fraud statutes. Elias gripped the edges of the lectern. He looked directly at Julian. He read the words slowly, stripping away every ounce of Julian's cultivated charm. "Nia is a nameless kitchen appliance I used to build my empire, and now I am unplugging her." The vile words poisoned the room. "How?" Total silence. The dripping water from the melted swan sculptures stopped registering. The scent of floor wax and stale champagne thickened in the cold air. Elias lowered his hands. The heavy vellum pages settled onto the mahogany wood. Marcus Holloway's chest rose and fell in a slow, calculated rhythm. The ambient jazz music piping through the overhead speakers cut off. Nia shifted her weight. She stepped forward. Her tailored cream wool coat caught the fractured light of the chandelier. She held her 4-pound daughter against her collarbone. Maya shifted, her tiny feet pressing against the silk blouse. The bloodline held firm. Nia looked at the man who had ordered her erasure. "Tell me, who has nothing now?" Her question demanded an absolute reckoning. Julian flinched. The razor-sharp edge of her voice sliced through the heavy air. He looked at her flawless cream coat. He looked at the infant resting in her arms, the child he had planned to hand over to the state, the child who now stood as the sole heir to a billion-dollar syndicate. "I have my own heir." Julian grabbed Chloe's arm. He dragged her out of the chair. She stumbled, her gold bangles clashing loudly. "I don't need your bloodline. Chloe is carrying the next Sterling. We will build a new franchise. We will rebuild the supply chains." His desperation was completely absolute. Chloe tried to pull her arm away. Her acrylic nails dug into his dark sleeve. Her eyes darted toward the exit. Elias Thorne tapped the microphone. Mr. Chen, the final file. Liam tapped the laptop trackpad. The projector screen illuminated again, security footage from a sterile, brightly lit medical corridor. The timestamp read 8:15 in the morning from the previous morning. Chloe Vance walked up to a sliding glass reception window. She wore a tailored black trench coat and large sunglasses. She slid a thick stack of $100 bills under the glass. The receptionist nodded, turned to a filing cabinet, and handed Chloe a manila folder. The camera zoomed in on the patient name printed on the tab. Elena Rostova. The video cut to a secondary angle. Chloe sitting in a private examination room. A doctor in a white coat handed her an ultrasound printout. Chloe smiled, folded the printout, and slipped it into her designer handbag. The video faded to black. A man in a tweed sport coat stood up from table 7. He held a leather medical bag. "I am Dr. Aris from the North Shore Private Clinic." The man adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Vance paid my receptionist $5,000 to purchase the ultrasound results of a patient who miscarried last week. Miss Vance has not been pregnant a day in her life. She is medically sterile." The final lie shattered into dust. Julian froze. His hand dropped from Chloe's arm. He turned his head slowly. He stared at the woman in the red silk dress. His jaw slacked. The hollow greed in his eyes fractured into a million pieces of sheer, unadulterated horror. Chloe said nothing. She did not meet his gaze. She looked at the floor. The heavy red silk dress hung off her shoulders. The venomous smirk was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of her own greed. Her silence was her confession. She had built her throne on a counterfeit ultrasound. "You lying parasite!" Julian choked on the words. He turned on his own accomplice. A distinguished older man with a silver cane stood up from table 2. Arthur Vance, the principal investor for the Vanguard Committee. Chloe's uncle. He leaned heavily on his silver cane. He looked at his niece. "You are no longer a Vance. Lose my number." The familial execution was incredibly swift. Arthur sat back down. He did not look at her again. One line. Maximum devastation. Chloe's knees buckled. She sank back into the heavy oak chair. She buried her face in her hands. The gold bangles slid down her forearms, a hollow, rattling chain. Julian stepped away from her. He rushed toward the center aisle. He straightened his bespoke suit jacket. He ran a hand over his short hair. He looked at the industry titans seated around him. He looked at the food critics holding their phones. "Listen to me," Julian raised his voice. His baritone strained, cracking under the massive acoustics of the glass dome. "I am a victim here. She manipulated me. Chloe forged those emails. She orchestrated the smear campaign. I am Julian Sterling. I am the undisputed king of Chicago." An older critic at table 4 turned his chair around. He faced the back wall. The head chef of a rival patisserie at table 5 stood up. He walked toward the exit, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the marble. Julian stepped further into the aisle. He threw his arms wide. "I created the heritage honey cake. I spent 2 years developing that texture. You all tasted it. You know my genius." Nobody looked at him. The waiters gathered their silver trays and walked back to the kitchens. The photographers lowered their cameras. The flashing strobe lights died out, leaving Julian standing in the dim, gray morning light. The room stopped listening. He was a ghost, shouting in an empty graveyard. He existed only in the past tense. Mia stood by the audio-visual cart. She felt the steady rise and fall of Maya's chest against her collarbone. She breathed in the scent of warm iron and sweet dough. The chill of the ice sculptures did not reach her. The warmth of the Holloway bloodline radiated through her veins. Marcus walked up beside her. He extended his massive, calloused hands. Nia gently lifted the 4-pound newborn. She placed Maya into her father's arms. Marcus cradled his granddaughter against his midnight charcoal cashmere overcoat. The billionaire titan held the tiny, swaddled bundle with the reverence of a man holding the crown jewels. Mia smoothed the front of her tailored cream wool coat. She turned her back to the mahogany podium. She turned her back to the man pleading with an audience of empty chairs. She turned her back to the woman crying into her own gold jewelry. She walked toward the doors the litigators parted for her. She owned the building. The heavy oak double doors of the crystal atrium stood open to the gray morning. Beyond the grand foyer, a relentless autumn rain battered the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Chicago Culinary Institute. The storm painted the polished marble floors in slick, watery reflections. The 100-foot crystal chandelier above Julian's head hummed with a high-voltage electrical buzz. The intense white light caught the sharp edges of the shattered champagne flutes still scattered across the center aisle. The massive, vaulted room smelled of wet wool, stale alcohol, and raw panic. 300 oak chairs sat empty. The industry titans, the Michelin-starred chefs, and the wealthy socialites had fled the blast radius. They had abandoned their silver trays of fresh espresso. They had left their plates of untouched beluga caviar to warm in the ambient air. The intricately carved swan ice sculptures anchoring the VIP tables had melted into deformed, pathetic blocks of slush. Freezing water dripped onto the heavy velvet tablecloths. It hit the floor with a steady, maddening rhythm. Julian stood by table 1. His bespoke midnight charcoal suit clung to his broad shoulders, heavy with cold sweat. The thick vein in his temple throbbed a frantic, erratic tempo against his brown skin. He gripped the edge of the marble table. His knuckles strained. He stared at the 60-foot projector screen suspended from the mezzanine balcony. Elias Thorne remained at the mahogany podium. "Bow!" The silver-bearded litigator did not pack his leather briefcase. He opened his sleek, matte black laptop. He typed a sequence of 12 characters. He pressed the return key. The sharp clatter of the plastic keyboard echoed through the silent dome. The projector screen flared bright white. A digital copy of the Illinois Corporate Registry illuminated the room. The bold black text read, "Sterling Patisserie, LLC." A thick, red digital line struck through the name. Beneath it, fresh text rendered in sharp black font, Holloway Heritage Brands, Asset Liquidation Complete. Elias adjusted his silver fountain pen. The acquisition is finalized. Elias's baritone voice required no microphone to command the quiet space. All physical assets, commercial leases, and proprietary recipes are now the exclusive property of Marcus Holloway. The banking freeze is permanent. Every delivery truck carrying your flour and sugar just turned around on the interstate. The commercial ovens in all 3 of your locations have been powered down by remote override. The padlocks are clicking shut on your loading docks right now. The empire was gone. Julian's lungs refused to expand. The air turned to ash in his throat. He watched a corporate litigator in a slate gray designer suit step forward. The lawyer collected the printed deed of transfer from a portable printer, placed it into a black leather portfolio, and pulled the zipper shut. The sharp metallic teeth sealed Julian's life away. Chloe Vance moved toward the shadows. She pushed her heavy oak chair back. The wood scraped loud against the marble. She pulled her thick scarlet cashmere coat tightly around her ribs, trying to smother the bright, damning color of her red silk dress. She kept her chin tucked to her chest. She aimed for the dim catering exit near the mezzanine stairs. Her red stilettos clicked a frantic, uneven rhythm against the floor. She needed to vanish. She needed to dissolve into the damp Chicago morning before the flashbulbs found her face. 2 men blocked the service corridor. They wore dark navy windbreakers with bold yellow federal insignia printed across the shoulder blades. The taller agent stepped directly into Chloe's path. He did not speak. He held up a thick manila envelope. The forged ultrasound, the fabricated medical records, the wire transfer receipts paid to the private clinic receptionist. Chloe stopped. Her heavy gold bangles slid down her forearm. They clanked together like iron chains. She looked at the stoic federal agent. She looked back over her shoulder at the grand foyer. The massive glass lobby door separated the atrium from the valet loop. 50 members of the local and national culinary press pressed their bodies against the reinforced glass. Camera lenses the size of mortar tubes tracked her every movement. News vans idled on the curb, their heavy diesel engines rumbling through the stone walls. "Miss Vance," the agent gestured toward the main aisle. "The marshals are waiting outside." Chloe shook her head. Her silk-pressed hair clung to her damp, hollow cheeks. She took a step backward. Her heel caught the thick velvet hem of a soaked tablecloth. She stumbled. She threw her arms out, reaching for the edge of the table. Nobody reached out to catch her. The 10 corporate litigators kept their hands tucked into their tailored pockets. She regained her balance. Her breath hitched in shallow, jagged gasps. The agents flanked her. They marched her forward. Chloe walked down the center aisle, the long walk of ruin. The heavy red cashmere coat dragged against the wet marble. She passed the mahogany podium. She passed the shattered crystal. She passed Nia Holloway. Nia stood near the exit. Her tailored cream wool coat hung crisp and flawless against her warm brown skin. She did not look at Chloe. She did not offer a single ounce of acknowledgement. Her silence was a fortress Chloe could never breach. The federal agents pushed the heavy glass lobby doors open. The roar of the press corps hit the atrium like a physical blow. Flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, chaotic strobe. Microphones thrust through the opening, jabbing aggressively toward Chloe's face. The reporters shouted over the driving rain. "Chloe, did you forge the Vanguard trademark applications? Miss Vance, who provided the fake ultrasound? Chloe, look here." The freezing wind whipped the red coat off her shoulders. It fell to the wet concrete. She raised her hands to shield her eyes from the blinding light flashes. Her heavy gold hoop earrings snagged on her own long acrylic nail. She panicked. She yanked her hand down hard. The gold clasp snapped. The thick metal earring tore the soft skin of her earlobe. A drop of dark blood swelled and ran down her neck, staining the collar of her red silk dress. She tripped on the wet pavement. Her red stiletto snapped at the base. She hit the ground. The heavy gold bangles shattered against the concrete curbside, scattering cheap metal links into the muddy storm drain. The cameras clicked faster. The flashing lights swallowed her whole. She became a permanent fixture in the tabloids, a woman destroyed by her own hollow greed. Julian watched the lobby doors swing shut. The red coat lay abandoned in the mud. The noise of the press, muffled behind a thick glass. He turned back to the room. He faced the 10 corporate litigators. He faced the billionaire chairman standing near the exit. He rubbed his face with both hands. The scent of his signature sandalwood and bergamot cologne mixed with the sour metallic stench of his own fear. 3 men in dark suits stepped out from behind the mezzanine staircase. They did not wear designer suits. They wore government-issued suits. The lead agent walked directly to table 1. He unclipped a heavy badge from his leather belt. The silver federal shield caught the light of the chandelier. He pulled a folded warrant from his interior jacket pocket. Julian Sterling. The agent's voice was flat, devoid of the theatricality of the culinary world. You are under arrest for felony wire fraud, corporate espionage, and the falsification of federal trademark filings. Put your hands behind your back. Mayor! Julian backed away. His hip slammed into the edge of the marble table. A silver tray of untouched beluga caviar flipped over. The black fish eggs and melting ice smeared across the dark wool of his bespoke trousers. The smell of brine and rotting fish clung to his legs. He looked at the federal agent. He looked at the heavy steel handcuffs dangling from the man's belt. You cannot dismantle an empire that bears my name. His voice shook. The commanding baritone resonance was dead. He sounded like a frightened man backed into a corner. The agent did not argue. He closed the distance. He grabbed Julian's right wrist. He twisted the arm sharp and high behind Julian's back. Julian gasped. The pain shot through his shoulder joint, forcing his torso down. The second agent grabbed his left arm. The third agent swept his tailored leg. The shattered crystal champagne flutes still littered the marble floor. Julian hit the floor. His knees slammed into the cold marble. The impact sent a jarring electric shock up his femurs. He fell exactly where Nia had fallen the night before. The pulverized glass from the shattered champagne flutes bit through the expensive midnight charcoal wool of his trousers. The sharp slivers dug deep into the skin of his kneecaps. He hissed through his teeth. The heavy steel cuffs ratcheted around his wrists. One click, then another, then a third. The sound was sharp, mechanical, and final. The cold metal pinched his skin against his prominent wrist bones. The agent shoved a heavy knee into the center of Julian's back, pinning him flush to the icy floor. The harsh chill of the marble seeped through his thin cotton dress shirt. He tasted the dust of the floor wax. He smelled the spilled sour champagne. Julian forced his heavy head up. Oh! He looked down the center aisle. He saw the polished, silver-tipped toes of Marcus Holloway's Italian leather shoes. Beside them, he saw the pristine hem of a tailored cream wool coat. He looked higher. Please don't let them take my bakery. His voice broke into a raw, pathetic whisper. The plea scraped against the cavernous silence of the glass dome. Marcus Holloway turned his broad shoulders away from the ruined baker. The billionaire chairman looked at his daughter. He gently lifted the swaddled, 4-pound bundle from his dark cashmere coat. He extended his massive, calloused hands. Nia reached out. She took her daughter. She pulled the heated white cotton blanket close to her chest. Maya weighed almost nothing, but she anchored the entire room. The warmth of the infant seeped through Nia's cream silk blouse, a fierce, living contrast to the hollow, aching space behind the fresh surgical stitches in her lower abdomen. The newborn's translucent skin flushed a deep, healthy pink. She breathed in soft, even puffs. The scent of warm iron, milk, and sweet dough drifted upward, cutting through the ozone and fear polluting the atrium. Maya's tiny, determined fingers curled into a tight fist against the lapel of Nia's coat. The baby shifted, seeking the familiar curve of her mother's collarbone. The Holloway bloodline rested secure against Nia's heart. Nia cradled the back of Maya's small head. She smoothed her thumb over the soft, dark down. She looked back down at the floor. Julian strained against the agent's knee. The glass ground deeper into his bleeding skin. He stared at the child he had tried to hand to the state. He stared at the woman he had called a nameless parasite. Nia. Just her name. A final, desperate exhalation escaping the ruins of his chest. Nia did not blink. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer him a single drop of anger. The fire had burned out, leaving only cold, impenetrable stone. You never owned a single grain of sugar. She turned her back. She adjusted her grip on the white cotton blanket. She began to walk. Her quiet, measured footsteps echoed against the vaulted glass ceiling. Julian lunged forward. He tried to follow her. He tried to drag himself across the wet marble. The heavy steel edge of the handcuffs bit brutally into his wrist bone, slicing the skin. The federal agent's large, rough hand clamped down hard onto his tailored shoulder. The immense downward pressure pinned him to the cold floor. He could not rise. He could not move. He could only watch her retreat. She walked into the blinding white flash of $1 billion dawn. The heavy glass door swung shut.